Raptor! Requiem! Requiem!
Hello again. So we're back. 8 weeks completed now, and time for my second kind of report. So yeah, things are definitely getting a bit weird, I would say, undoubtedly at this point, both in the sense of my apparent kind of psychological demise into the requiem, and also just logistically. That's been like the huge theme, I think, in the second month. It's just the logistics around planning my weeks. In that first month of doing 8 hours, for example, it's quite easy to get that done without thinking about it too much. But getting up to like 24 hours, there was, I think, even a 7 day window the second month where I did like 37 and a half hours. And that's just like moving, not including route planning and food and driving to go mountain biking and stuff. It's a lot harder to get that done logistically, and also quite hard to rationalize it to yourself, I think, and to your friends and family and your partner and things as to why you would do that. But by and large, I've succeeded in doing those things, I think. And let's talk a little bit about more in detail what I did in these last 4 weeks and how that impacted my cycling performance. So my strategy stayed exactly the same as the first month, in the sense of just like all out focusing on time with nothing else in mind, really. As we know, in the first month I did 8, 10, 12, 14 hours per week. And in the second month, I just wanted to hit like 16, 18, 20, and 22, which gets me up to this kind of zone of being able to empathize with a professional's 22-hour-a-week volume. So yeah, by and large, I kind of did that. In the first week, I actually only did 15 hours because I was going away for the weekend. So a good example of logistically not thinking about that enough in advance. Second week, I managed to get the 18. Then I got the 19.5, so half an hour. I can't remember why I didn't do that, but it was half an hour behind. But in the end, in a sort of dramatic twist and a show of extreme dedication to this arbitrary cause, I actually managed to get 24 hours. So I finished the month half an hour ahead of schedule, ahead of what I'd hoped to do. So yeah, managed to hit my volume goals and was quite pleased with that. In terms of like how this looks in the nerd fest of a spreadsheet, you can see my total time was 74 and a half hours. So pretty mental from my standard of normality of what I've ever done in the past. Total time, like elapsed time, is 82 hours. So that shows kind of, that's just me stopping for coffees and stuff. So the actual complete time on this thing is a lot bigger, really. While I've been ignoring kind of like what I would consider kind of vanity metrics around things like distance and stuff, I thought there were some kind of fun facts this time around distance particularly. So I did 3,300 kilometers. That is a fun fact because the Tour de France this year, 2024, happens to be 3,500 kilometers. So I pretty much did the Tour de France. One could argue. Another interesting angle, if you're curious, is the reason this is nowhere near as difficult, aside from many other factors, is that the Tour de France climbing is like 52,000 meters of climbing, which is crazy. I only did 13,000, so vastly different there aside from everything else. I've started looking at calories. Well, not really, but like looking at intensity a little bit more. Calories is one way to look at that. And one interesting way to break that down was to look at calories per hour, which for me in the last 4 weeks was 375 calories per hour that I'm burning. And that kind of backs up this idea that I'm doing pretty low intensity stuff. I know that if I'm doing like a high intensity session indoors, I'll burn like between 700 and 1,000 calories in an hour. So yeah, this kind of backs up, which I already knew, that most of my focus at the moment is very low intensity stuff. Just building sustainable volume, I guess you could say, is what I'm trying to do. If we look at this from a pie chart point of view, which I'm sure you're very excited to do, you can see that similar to last month, I'm doing about 75% cycling. So about 50% mountain biking, 25% road cycling and indoor cycling. So like there are intervals and Zwift is what the virtual cycling is. And doing quite a lot of strength training as well. I'm averaging about 2 hours a week of strength training to prevent injury primarily. And also doing an equal amount of time of running, so quite a lot of running. Doing a lot of yoga as well, which is kind of new to me. I just started doing this last month, really because I think, cycling's so fixed. You're in one position all the time. So doing yoga felt like it kind of opened up my upper body, especially a lot more, and stopped me getting all kind of cramped up. And finally doing a bit of swimming as well, kind of for a similar kind of mobility type angle is what I was going for there. So yeah, that's kind of like a bird's eye view of the breakdown of all my activities. Something else I'm looking at and starting to do a lot more going into the next sort of section of this is looking at how I plan my weeks to kind of win on the logistics side of things. But I'm also trying to look at how I can build more sustainable kind of intensity into my workouts, I suppose you could call them. A couple of examples, like 2 examples. One example I thought was pretty good, and I'd be really interested to hear if anyone has any feedback or an idea of how to structure a good week or any thoughts on these examples. So yeah, the first one I thought was really good. I did like a long mountain bike ride on the Monday, a long road bike ride on the Tuesday with quite a lot of hills and stuff. On the Wednesday I did some strength training and a run. On the Thursday I did a kind of easy, steady zone 2 road bike ride on the flat. And then on the Friday I did some yoga and kind of quite high intensity interval session indoors on Zwift. So for me, that was a great example of how I could structure a week kind of effectively. I got 18 hours done. I was free all weekend to spend time with other human beings apart from myself, which is something I'm trying to change by training with other people a bit more, because I don't think that's particularly good for a human being to do. And yeah, that felt like a pretty good week. What felt like a less good week, or different week at least, was this one, where I did like a 16-hour big mission on the Monday, where I went bikepacking and essentially did a huge mountain biking trail. And then I was just so frazzled for the rest of the week that I couldn't really do much more apart from I did one more cycle and then a lot of yoga and stuff. But yeah, a very different week where I did one big objective and then frazzled myself out. So that's 2 examples of the kind of weeks I've been doing in more detail. And I think in sort of future videos, I'll talk more about that. And again, I'm looking for more kind of advice and doing a bit more research into how best to structure my weeks now to build more power, which is a bit of a spoiler into some of my results. So let's talk about how all this frazzling about actually impacted my physiological cycling performance numbers. So starting off with VO2 max this time because I think it's quite interesting, so why not do that? And yeah, you might remember that when I first did this in May, my VO2 max came out at an estimated 44, so pretty kind of mediocre. And after just 4 weeks of training, it jumped up really, what I thought was really severely, to 59.2. And so I was really excited to see what happened after another 4 weeks with a really big increase in volume, what kind of change we might see there. So yeah, I did my stepping up and down thing, which remains very boring to watch. I did that for 6 minutes, analysed the last 2 minutes for the average heart rate there, and then I used the chart to map out and get the estimated VO2 max. And yeah, what is pretty crazy again is that it came out a severe jump again to 69.3 as an estimate. So yeah, pretty wild. And we're now officially on the edge of Tour de France averages. So who knows what could happen next. And yeah, I think anyone, even if you're sort of questioning this because it's not a laboratory one, like for me, the thing that remains really curious about this is just how the functioning of my heart can change so massively over 8 weeks. Because when I first did it, that 44 score or whatever, my heart rate averaged for the last 2 minutes at like 150 BPM. Second time it dropped down to 130 average for the last 2 minutes. And this time when I did it, it was 120 average. So yeah, I was kind of joking to my wife, at the very least, after all of this work, I have become amazing at walking upstairs with a low heart rate. So a huge success in life. And yeah, genuinely just quite a crazy change in the way my heart is working. So yeah, I was really happy with this and interested to see what happens the next time. But for now, let's talk about FTP. FTP is a little bit less of a elegant, smooth story this month compared to VO2 max at least. So as you know, I started, or as you may remember, I started with an FTP in May of 2.83. After 4 weeks, it jumped up to 3.18. And one factor of this is important is weight. So over the last 8 weeks, I've lost 6 kilos, so almost a stone, which I was really pleased about because it makes it easier to push myself up hills and things like that. And it also should really increase my FTP, my watts per kilogram. So in this third test, I was really hopeful I could get like 260 watts or something like that, which would give me a pretty good FTP. And it didn't really happen like that. I think because I was so tired after all the stuff I was doing, and maybe a bit too ambitious. And I also partly blame the kind of brutal metal music I chose for the first test. So after the first test, I abandoned dramatically with this big metal sound. After about 10 minutes, I just couldn't do it anymore. I was just frazzled. And so I thought if I had lunch and had a nap or something like that, I would be totally on form in the afternoon and be able to get a similar result. So I decreased the watts a little bit, tried it again, similar outcome where I collapsed on the handlebars after about 12 minutes, I think, in the second time, and kind of gave up for a couple of days. Well, I didn't give up. I wanted to sort of rest over a couple of days and come back and try and do it again. Thankfully, I managed to complete it the third time, but with a much lower watts than I expected, and a similar outcome of me sort of crying into my handlebars. But it was quite good because I actually got into the ramp test part a little bit more, so it felt more like a successful test in that sense. But yeah, the FTP jump itself only went up to 3.35 watts per kilogram. So just really like an incremental increase in the actual watts I was generating. And yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about the end about why I think that is and what I'm going to do to try and change that. And we shall see if it actually works. So yeah, that's what FTP looks like this month. And let's talk about real world success now a little bit. Definitely the sort of most unsuccessful real world thing is the quality of my chat that I've recorded on videos. So if you watch this one, this is quite funny where I explain my grand plan to wear a vest and to see what happens. And this is how it unfolded. So I'm going for a kind of different setup today. Put everything in my top tube here. And then I'm just wearing a vest because it's quite warm. It makes me feel quite light. That's my angle. And see how it goes, I suppose. So the vest band didn't work, got quite cold. So there we go. And that's one of many examples of me having amazing, sparkling conversations with myself about vests and so on. I also had a really good one about eating dates and about whether or not to wear gloves. So yeah, the quality of my chat has definitely declined pretty massively. But in terms of real world success, more clearly, what I have been doing is looking at kind of objectives around big mountain bike trails. So like, for example, there's a route in Jura called the Grande Traverse De Jura. And it's this big 370 kilometer trail with quite a lot of climbing that goes from Switzerland down to France. And yeah, I've been trying to do that at the fastest known time speed. So like kind of world record speed, I guess you could call it, which makes it sound a bit more dramatic than it really is. But yeah, I've been doing sections of it at that speed to see if I could maintain that speed for 370 kilometers. So that's kind of forming itself into a pretty serious objective, I suppose. And that will probably require quite a lot of time and quite specific training. But it's a really exciting one. So that's one I'm deciding to kind of test out at the moment, and I've had some pretty real world successful little test drives, like doing like the last 70 kilometers of it, for example, at the speed which I would be required to do for the full like 26 hours or something that would be required for me to beat the fastest known time in it, which would be an amazing outcome of this whole sort of falafel. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with real world success. Aside from that, just had some really good little adventures that I have filmed. I saw this weird horse that I cycled past. It was a pretty cool story. And aside from that, just doing a lot of mountain biking because my road bike has been in the bike shop, for quite a long time this month. So yeah, that's kind of real world success, I suppose. So that brings us to the end of month number 2 in review, I suppose you could call it. And one way you could look at what I've done is I've kind of like completed a base training period. So most people in the context of training periodization, you'd probably call it officially, is most people would do a base training period, a build phase, and then specialism or speciality phase at the end. And the base period is typically focused on building a good sort of fitness foundation, which would be signified by having a good aerobic capacity. So in my case, VO2 max is looking really good now. And also a kind of foundation of volume I have achieved as well, which for me is like a good base I have built. So in a way you could say I've completed my base period. In the build phase, which follows the base period, most people would start, in my case at least, definitely focusing more on power and FTP specifically. So trying to build more muscular endurance and more strength and power, which for me I'm going to be measuring with FTP. And so that's what I'm going to kind of do next over these next 8 weeks. Really, I'm going to kind of start a build phase approach. And then in the specialism phase, which is more about specializing for a specific race or a specific type of event that you're training for me, that's starting to get really exciting now that I have this idea of this kind of Grande Traverse De Jura route, like a big ultra mountain bike trail. And yeah, it starts meaning I can start thinking about specific types of training I might want to do to try and achieve that goal. So yeah, it's getting really exciting from that point of view, and it also works quite well to just focus more on quality rather than quantity now in this build phase. So yeah, that's kind of where I am. I've got a couple of races coming up as well in the next month or so, worth noting. So I have a hill climb, which should be really funny because it's just near here. So it's a hill I go up quite a lot. It's like literally a kilometer away. And it's just a time trial up a short climb. So it's like it should be a 20 or 30 minute climb. And you just get up to the top as fast as you possibly can with a lot of sort of local people. So that should be really fun and a good excuse to focus on more short power blasting. And after that, I have a criterium race with my club that I race with early September. So that should be a really good one too, and as an excuse to train my FTP a little bit more. It'll be just like an hour and a half of like surging, blasting power quite fast. So yeah, should be quite fun as well, and a good sort of test in themselves, I suppose. But yeah, that's kind of where I currently am. Thank you very much for watching. If you made it to this point in the video, and like I said, if you have any ideas or any feedback or things like that, then please do let me know in the commentos. And aside from that, thank you again for watching, and have a nice day.
Requiem.